Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. So we're just wrapping up on Libya, this Rome conference. This is essentially a conference of terrorist supporters, this tremendous contradiction. In Pakistan and Afghanistan, the U.S. says the main goal, the overriding goal, is to attack and kill everybody who's from al-Qaeda. But in Yemen and in Libya, and one suspects in Algeria and Syria and elsewhere, the al-Qaeda people are embraced, of course. They've now become pro-democracy forces. They're going to get money. They're going to get oil income. They're getting diplomatic support. They're getting modern weapons. They're getting advisors. They're being organized into colonial regiments under at least British, French, and Italian officers and maybe U.S. officers, too. The special forces have been there by now since the 23rd of February, and the whole thing was planned. It's South Mistral. So you get the idea on that. We also have this mythological idea coming from the left liberals that now that Obama has liquidated bin Laden, it's time to have a withdrawal from Afghanistan. Well, something of this sort is certainly possible, but what would it be? It is not to make peace, but it is rather to do what the U.S. has been trying to do for quite a while, which is to essentially end the conflict between the U.S. and the Pashtuns, the Taliban, and play the Pashtuns against Pakistan. That was the hope all along. The whole policy of the West Point speech, December 2009, is export the civil war out of Afghanistan and into Pakistan, and do that by using the Pashtun group and also the Baluchi group against the other two ethnic groups inside Pakistan. And it's worth mentioning, going back to February, Mrs. Clinton over there at the State Department carried out a big shift in the U.S. attitude towards the Taliban. It used to be that the United States was demanding preconditions from the Taliban to sit down and negotiate. The Taliban was required to renounce violence, to break with al-Qaeda, and to embrace the Afghan constitution. All of those were preconditions of even talking to the U.S., but now in February, Mrs. Clinton said, we're dumping all that. We are willing to talk to the Taliban with no preconditions. Dear Mullah Omar, I want to see you soon. So you get the idea. But of course, even this would not be peace, because the CIA plan that we discussed at the time, during 2009, when there was this long debate about what to do with McChrystal getting into the act and so forth, the CIA plan, which was, I believe, the Biden plan, was do it all with Predator drones over Afghanistan in large numbers, and special forces teams. And now that we have the so-called success, this staged theater circus of Abbottabad, we now have increasing calls to say, well, the special forces are what you need. Look, all those 100,000 troops in Afghanistan couldn't do it. All you needed was a real good, Navy SEAL team and all of this. So watch for the U.S. to attempt to indeed make a deal with the Taliban, with the idea that the Pashtuns, that larger ethnic group, will then be played against the government in Islamabad. And then the CIA plan would be implemented inside Afghanistan. Since we are looking at the Arab world here, in Yemen, as of today, President Saleh is still hanging tough. He's still holding on. He's defiant. He now says he's not going anywhere. He had been pressurized by the Gulf Cooperation Council. Syria continues to show us the example of how you can defend against destabilizations if the ruling elite is compact and united. The demonstrations today, yet another Friday, right? Big chance for tumult. But no, I think this, as far as I can see, even with the best efforts of Al Jazeera to make this look imposing, it doesn't look very imposing. And the way they're doing it in Syria is preventive troop deployment. In other words, you put tanks in the streets and keep them there way before the Friday, so that it becomes much harder for people to come out. Al Jazeera is pushing, along with other imperialist media, the line that Syrians are no longer afraid. They're no longer afraid. They're coming out. They have contempt for death. They don't care. except that, of course, in Damascus, no demonstrations of any note in a heavily centralized country. So the big Syrian Friday falls flat. And that would seem to be the Syrian story. The European Union, this bunch of gaggling poultry, have now said that they want this asset freeze against Syria and a visa ban. Well, I'm sure Assad and his generals are quaking in their boots. The interesting thing also is the Al Jazeera analysis is that it's the generals and the secret police guys who are the hawks. They want to crack down. Assad is really a reformer, different than Egypt, where Mubarak wanted to defend the state and then was dragged down by Tantawi and Annan and the rest of these characters. Now, we've also got the deal between Fatah and Hamas, and I suppose that's a good thing as far as it goes, right? Both of these groups are on the defensive. There are ferments being fomented against them as well, and Netanyahu insists on saying that this is a step away from peace. Well, no, it's crazy. You've got to have one interlocutor. The Turks and the Egyptians, notably, pressing Netanyahu to be reasonable. Not likely. And where this goes, this is anybody's guess. In terms of other places to be aware of, right? Russia remains in the grip of this rivalry between Medvedev and Putin, which means that the ability of Russia to act in the world is somewhat in question. In China, we have the succession to the new president, Xi, X-I. Hard to tell from here what's going on with that. And now, disturbingly, in Iran, a faction fight between Ahmadinejad and Khamenei, with Khamenei today ordering the arrest of a number of allies of Ahmadinejad, accusing them of sorcery and having traffic with spirits, with the so-called jinns of pre-Muslim pagan times in these countries. We have to assume that splits, wherever these splits occur, these are fomented by our dear friends in London and in Washington, and these things happening at the present time make them very, very suspect. Now, just in terms of Assange that we mentioned before, Assange this week gave an interview, I believe, to Russia Today, and he made earth-shaking revelations. Assange told us what shocked us, and nobody would have believed it, that Facebook is a mechanism for spying on people. Wow, we're blown away. Who would have thought it? Who ever would have believed it? Well, pardon the irony. I hope you realize that was irony. Assange, of course, being an artist in the CIA genre of limited hangout, wants you to think that his tired, superficial, idiotic scandals are somehow the great earth-shaking thing. Remember, he doesn't like 9/11 truth, doesn't want to hear anything about the big covert operations of the age. He is part today of one of the covert operations of the age, the so-called Arab Spring, which I would call the putsch wave, the wave of putches across the Arab world. The stuff that he tells you is stuff that you already knew. You can find clips of me on Tarpley.net. Go back to about a year ago, and you'll find me telling that Facebook, of course, is a tool of the U.S. intelligence community, offensively, as in Iran, and in a sense of intelligence gathering, that too. So this is now the situation. Now, in the background, as in the case of 1914, we have an economic crisis going on. The dollar is now at a 3-year low compared to most currencies. And here in the Washington Post of Wednesday, May 4th, we have an article about the dollar at risk. The currency's slow decline could become a precipitous fall. One of the biggest dangers now is that the dollar could decline in ways that are abrupt and disruptive. So it's a warning that the collapse of the dollar could occur now just about any time. Bear that in mind. This is what's propelling the U.S. British elite into fight-forward adventurism, and we'll be back in a minute.